Okay, so why don't we get started? Welcome to the second half of the XLH Day presentations. So first, remind me never to go to a picnic at Dr. Econ's house. So if I have to donate blood every time I walk in, I don't think I'll be attending. He has a phlebotomist instead of a keg. So today I'm going to talk about something that I'm really very passionate about, and I've heard just too many sad stories since last night and today from our adult patients and the progressive suffering that adult patients encountered. So Dr. Econs had mentioned that at one point we had this word vitamin D resistant rickets. The problem with that title is the word rickets suggests that it's a childhood disease. In fact, this is not just a childhood disease, it's also an adult disease. And the adult disease can often be more traumatic than the childhood disease. I reviewed 2 papers this past month. Both of the authors on each paper used the word vitamin D resistant rickets. And on my comments to the authors, I said, stop it. Stop it because it's sending the wrong message. This is the terminology we're using now and the terminology we should be using forward, which is X-linked hypophosphatemia. So I was at Yale for a number of years doing research on XLH. I still continue my research program there. I'm sort of back and forth wearing 2 hats. And I'm also now at the Frank H. Netter School of Medicine at Quinnipiac University. And they've really been wonderful about embracing my research program there. I'll talk a little bit about that today. But we were able to host XLH Day at the medical school last year. And just to put it into perspective, when we were planning it, or I was planning it, the auditorium was not done. We literally were the first people to step foot in the brand new auditorium. Absolutely beautiful space. Everybody at the university were amazing. They donated food. They donated housekeeping services. They donated the space. We had security, were amazing, shuttling the patients back and forth. It was just such a wonderful event, and we're hoping to have it again at the medical school in the near future. So I hope you all can come up to the East Coast someday to see this. The other thing that I've benefited from being at the medical school is that I'm able to do multiple things with X-linked hypophosphatemia in terms of scholarly activity. So we actually have an awesome academic technology department. That said, last year's program, the 2012 program, was 2 years, I guess, was recorded in full, and it's posted on the Quinnipiac University YouTube channel. It has a ton of amazing data from people like Tom Carpenter, Maggie Seaton, a very talented orthopedic surgeon who treats XLH patients, Melinda Sharkey, Tom Carpenter, and then myself. So we had and Ragbir Kaur, who did an amazing presentation on the dental issues with XLH, which I know really dominate the adult disorder. I brought with me today a pamphlet that I developed with Dr. Kaur that's intended to give to your dentist. Everybody take a copy, bring it to your dentist. It helps explain XLH to them, and it also gives kind of a guideline of treatment that's very specific and unique to XLH. So I really encourage you to take copies, make sure your dentist take a few extra ones, bring it to your dentist, have him leave them in his office. The academic technology people recorded this, and then afterwards we were thinking about ways of really getting people to talk about and to hear about XLH, so I reapproached AT again, and I asked if we could make a video. And due to the generosity of a family, the Putnam family, and also I made Dr. Carpenter a movie star, we made a video, and I'm going to share that with you today. Oops.
My name is Chase, and I am 9 years old, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
After talking to some friends, they referred me to a university orthopedist that they had been to. So I took Chase and Cohen, because he had symptoms as well, and they did x-rays. And in that same visit, the orthopedist came in and said, he has X-linked hypophosphatemic rickets. Through them, I realized, they got this from me. These are all the symptoms that I had, and I got them from my dad. I never received any treatment as a child. It didn't really severely affect me at such a young age. It wasn't until I was much older where it really started having debilitating symptoms. Once I went to this university and they diagnosed my children with XLH, when we went to the appointment, she had to look it up online. When it comes to my kids, I want to go to someone who knows a lot about it. I found some articles and then found who wrote this. It was, Dr. Carpenter.
We've been able to work closely with them and their local physicians to manage their condition, we think, optimally. Children with this disorder are generally required to take multiple medications every day.
When I wake up in the morning, I have to take calcitrol and phosphorus, and then when I go to school, I have to take 2 more.
4 times a day, our boys are taking supplements. That's a big responsibility for a 6- and 9-year-old to do that.
It has been kind of hard how we explain it to him and try to keep him from being discouraged for little things that are big things for him.
I like to play outside and play basketball and play baseball and football.
He's very good at baseball and he can put it in the outfield, but if he doesn't, then probably not going to make it to first base. Stumbling over his feet. It is heartbreaking because he's trying so hard.
Where Chase struggles to keep up with his competitors, gets tired more quickly than his teammates.
The child is at great risk if the diagnosis is not made early. Multiple and severe bow deformities occur. The game changes a little bit in adulthood. Mild deafness is not uncommon, and sometimes vertigo can even happen, and ringing in the ears or tinnitus can occur. The dental abscesses can also continue throughout adult life, and arthritis is very common.
I believe it's really important that medical students and residents learn about X-linked hypophosphatemic rickets because this is our future. This is my children's future. People need to know earlier. We need to be able to detect it. People are going to have the same kind of symptoms that we do, maybe more severe, and they're not going to be treated. And the people that already have it aren't going to have answers.
Investment in research in this area is critical. It's critical not only for the patients that have XLH, but it's very important for the people that have many other types of bone and mineral disorders.
Much of what we know about XLH we learned through a listserv, through XLH Network. I watched my wife spend hours and hours and hours reading.
Any new symptom that came up for me or for my children, I would also type in and realize, okay, so other people are having this too.
The symptoms of XLH are real to me. They affect my life each day. I see my 2 children struggling with these symptoms. I see my wife struggling with it. What I want to do is help bring awareness so that not only can we have the right physicians in our hometown for the right medications, but that one day we can find a cure.
So the reason I wanted to show this, this is actually posted on the XLH Network website, as well as the link to the 2012 XLH Day. But the other reason, and if you Google "Growing Up with XLH," it's on YouTube. The reason I wanted to show it was the latter half of the talk, where we talked about research and advocacy. So I know you heard today that I might be talking a lot about the enthesopathy. You'll hear a little bit about it. Usually I give a lot of sciencey talks. But today I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit, or maybe my Becky box, but she stole it, so I can't do that. And I want to talk about really what we need to do going forward and what we're learning as a consequence of research. And I did want to mention that the group that made this video, here in this picture you can see Dr. Carpenter, I'm sorry, you can see Justin Schuessler and Justin Hall, who were a big part of making the video. They actually received a Tele Award for this on patient advocacy, so we're really, really proud of that. And you can see Bill Coogan is in the picture. He's just there for eye candy, so that's about it. So I went on the internet to find the URL for the video, and I saw there was a new post on there that I hadn't seen. I check it every now and then to see what people are posting. Or actually, our AT department monitors what gets posted. They select posts, and I saw a new one I had never seen before. And I was thinking about how I would sort of be able to serve as a segue to today's talk, and this couldn't have been better. So the post starts. I look on the XLH website, and I see happy, smiling families, families that had hope for the future, families who are given themselves and their affected XLH children and reason to think that they can live with and around this disease as a minor inconvenience. I might have agreed with you until my child entered her 30s. My daughter is a spontaneous case of XLH. She was diagnosed and treated early by the best doctors in the business, Yale, New Haven, Mayo Clinic, as well as a child. She went to a prestigious college, learned and thrived, ready to go out into the world with a disability that she was determined would not get in her way. Nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared her for the agony that she would be experiencing since entering adulthood. Deep, never-ending pain, pain that doesn't go away, pain that made her deepest depend on narcotics to function on even a basic level. Narcotics are a bad choice to deal with chronic pain, but they seem to be the only help, and a minor one at that. Help that comes with many side effects. The state of her medical insurance is a joke. She is told there is no standard of care for her condition, but then is turned down for desperately necessary medical care because it does not, I'm sorry, it's so hard to see at this angle. It does not follow the standard of care. She has been told that the pain in adult XLH patients is not well studied. Do you think? Stop giving families false hope that this is a minor challenge. Stop telling people that this is a manageable disease and their children will be okay. Stop telling them. At 33, my daughter has now given up on living on her own and is coming back to the life with her to live with her father and I. She has given up on her dreams of becoming a parent, traveling the world. She even had to give up her dog because she could no longer walk it and open a can of dog food on her own. Stop telling them it will be okay. I don't think I could come up with a better segue to talk about the adult disorder. We've heard a lot today about the childhood disorder, and not that that's not a critical part of the disorder, but kind of a neglected part of the disorder is the adult. Some of the things we heard about earlier is that the adult becomes very compromised, and one of the primary reasons they come back to the clinic as adults and are the major comorbidities of the disease is the persistent osteomalacia, as well as the enthesophytes, which a common name for their bone spurs, and osteophytes, which are secondary to the degenerative osteoarthritis that you see in these patients. They actually develop these bone spurs at the margins of the joints, and that's thought to be kind of a compensation to stabilize the joint. You can see some images below here in one of the publications that I have showing the bone spurs. I think Eric showed a couple of these, and the adhesophytes on the joints. And these really do cause a lot of clinical issues. The other thing we discovered in the lab was that it's not unique to XLH. There's another disease called autosomal recessive hypophosphatemic rickets, which is caused by a completely different mutation. It's not caused by the FEX mutation. And this was an important study. This patient has severe enthesopathy, and the reason I show it's not a very good image to show, but what I did want to show was that there's an arrow pointing here, and that's where this gentleman had a hole drilled into his tooth so that he could eat through a straw because the ligament in his jaw became mineralized. It was like a bone spur, and that's how severe it got. And so this gave me the incentive to study with my colleague at McGill, Andy Carapoulos, to study this disease. And so we made a mirroring mouse model of this disorder, and we found that, in fact, just like the mouse model for XLH, it too develops bone spurs, or the enthesopathy. And again, this is very important because the two common factors between these two different disorders is FGF23. So we know that FGF23 is doing something bad. And we also know a common part of this disorder is the osteomalacia. So what we think is happening is that even though this part of the disorder seems to be resistant to therapy, some of the modeling we've done suggests that improving the integrity of the bone will actually diminish this compensation to making more of these mineralizing cells where your tendons and ligaments insert. The analogy I like to use is that if you have a tent and you put your 4 spokes in the tent, in the ground, you have a nice stable tent, and then you have a rainstorm, heavy, heavy rain, and the ground gets all soggy. How are you going to stabilize your tent? You're going to put more spokes into the tent, and that's going to help stabilize it. And that's kind of what the ligaments are doing. They're making more of these cells that mineralize. They're normally part of your ligament insertion. They start making more and more of these cells to kind of help stabilize that insertion. Because it's inserting into a soft matrix, soft bone. And we know that these cells also express that receptor for FGF23, so that probably also contributes to it. So you kind of have a perfect storm here. So we're hoping that we can better study the impact of therapies like the FGF23 antibody on the sequence of events that we see as it relates to the bone spurs. We've also done studies looking at the cartilages of patients, the XLH mouse, the height mouse. That's this little guy right here. You can't underestimate how much of an impact this little guy has had on the field of XLH. We've learned so much from this mouse. And I was lucky to have gotten funded to do a couple of pilot studies using this particular mouse. And using this mouse, we found also that our cartilages normally have a layer of cells of chondrocytes that are mineralized. When we looked at the height mouse, we found that that normal layer of mineralized tissue in the cartilages is gone. It's just not mineralized. And we measured that in a number of ways. What we did find, though, is when we treated those mice with phosphorus and calcitriol, that they actually recovered that zone of mineralized cartilage. That zone of mineralized cartilage is really, really important in everybody. It helps the tissue, it acts as a transitional tissue so that it can accommodate all of those mechanical forces that we have when we, for example, stand. It kind of acts as a buffer zone. It helps to buffer the mechanical forces that you have on weight-bearing joints to the underlying bone. So we would hypothesize, and we've now seen this, that when you treat, that the tissues get better in the cartilages. But now when you stop treatment, it reverts back to the original state. And that is because these cells don't divide. That's why arthritis is so bad. Once you lose those chondrocytes, those cartilage cells, they're gone. So what happens is if we stop therapy, they revert back to that old stage of not having those mineralized cells that should be there. So we would hypothesize that, in fact, going forward, we want to learn more that, in fact, if we treat adults, will that help to preserve the cartilage structure so that patients don't develop these bone spurs at the joints? And this study that we have going forward is not funded. Many of the XLH studies, many of the rare bone disease studies are not funded. Funding is at an all-time low right now. And we depend on folks like you to advocate for research and for monies to help pay for studies so that we really can learn more about the adult disease. So we currently have a study going on at Quinnipiac University, and due to the generosity of a collaboration with Ultragenics, we'll be doing a study specifically on the adult population. We're currently recruiting. These numbers aren't hard and fast, but this is the age we're targeting, between 40 and 65 years old. And we're looking at those folks that do have these musculoskeletal disabilities. And we'll be doing these studies with a cohort of interprofessional people from physical therapy, occupational therapy, from medicine, diagnostic imaging, and the School of Social Work. And we're going to make measurements like gait analysis, how you walk, your range of motion, how can you move, how far can you move, what is your range of motion, and your mobility. Does it affect mobility? We're also going to collaborate with our imaging folks to make correlations between those changes we see in these parameters. Really importantly, we're working with the Department of Social Work. I've heard so many stories in the last couple of days where people are struggling alone. And we need to bring in the support services of social work, people like social workers and occupational therapists who are also trained in mental wellness, to really help work with patients. And so once we publish this data, it'll be out there. And I always tell people, if it's not published, it's like it doesn't exist. It has to be in the literature. So this will help us to make clinicians more aware that this, in fact, is not a childhood disease, not restricted to the childhood, but it, in fact, is a very real adult disorder. Another study that I'm involved in, I'm collaborating with my colleagues, Dr. Stephen Tomasini at Yale University, is what is the impact of pregnancy and lactation during in the patient with XLH. So during the tail end of pregnancy and during breastfeeding, baby takes mineral from mom's skeleton. That's normal. That happens in all women. So, and during most of pregnancy, the body upregulates, mom's body upregulates the levels of 125, the active form of vitamin D, to get more calcium and phosphate to help baby build that skeleton. So we did some studies in the height mouse, and under the prediction that, well, these patients can't upregulate 125, so all that mineral is going to come from mom's skeleton. So what we found is a couple of things. There's some really interesting findings, and one is, in a miracle, suddenly women with XLH can suddenly upregulate 125. Their PTH levels, these are again in the murine model, in the mouse model, their PTH levels, which are normally high, all of a sudden come down, just like in the unaffected population. So we see these changes that seem to be normal suddenly in the maternal XLH person. So this is really interesting, completely sort of unpredicted, and Dr. Inkon spoke a little bit about that. Oftentimes in the lab we go in there and we know the answer, and then we find out we don't know the answer. So every time we learn something new, it's exciting. The other thing we found, which maybe wasn't as good, and is that there is actually quite a bit of mineral and remodeling that occurs in the maternal skeleton, and that these data are currently putting together, and we have a manuscript we'll be submitting shortly. So again, this will be another piece of the puzzle of understanding XLH. So now it's time for a quiz, and you guys should score pretty well on this. So how many people are affected with XLH? We've heard some numbers, 1 in 20,000. So that's I think a conservative estimate. So we're learning more and more about these sporadic or spontaneous cases of XLH. so that we think that this might be an underreported number because it takes a long time, and sometimes these spontaneous cases are never accurately diagnosed. But the number and the different mutations that occur in these spontaneous cases are quite big. How many people are affected with rare diseases? Any guesses? According to the NIH, there are between 6,000 and 7,000 rare diseases affecting from 25 to 30 million Americans. 1 in every 10 individuals in this country has received a diagnosis of a rare disease. So the nonsense that we hear that studying a rare disease is not important because it only affects a few people is just that. It's nonsense. When we put all of our rare diseases together, now we have a large cohort of affected people. And so it's important that we collaborate with each other and we get the support that we need to better study and understand these diseases. True or false? XLH occurs only in the USA. False. Yeah, we know it occurs everywhere. This is a recent study. This is a family in Saudi Arabia. This is 2014. This is not 1963. This is 2014. They finally got a diagnosis, so this little one right here has some hope. This was one of the lucky members of the cohort who had a few teeth remaining. These are very, very severely affected patients. So even though there really isn't a standard of care, we really are making progress in the U.S., but this is a worldwide disease, and we also need to educate our colleagues worldwide. So how do we do that? Well, we can get involved in organizations like NORD. NORD is an organization that advocates for, on behalf of rare diseases. It's an important organization because now we come together and we make great numbers. And with numbers, we have more power and we have more of an impact. They go to Washington, they talk, they advocate. There are many opportunities to get involved. I encourage that. You can volunteer. You can volunteer with the XLH network. Every little bit of help helps. Every little, even if it's helping out with the website, helping stuffing envelopes, helping send out emails, helping monitoring the listserv. Any sorts of these things are beneficial. The other thing I wanted to talk about is for moms and dads, develop a 504 plan for your child. This is a national law. It comes out of the Americans with Disability Act. Go to the school, work with the administration there, work with the principal, work with a counselor, whoever you need to get on your ward. Have them work with your pediatrician, your occupational therapist, or whoever treats your child, and make sure your child has a day that's as enriching and as equivalent to any other child at that school. That's their right. It might mean adaptive equipment. It might mean chairs where their feet can touch the ground. It might mean different physical education activities. It may be different limitations on physical activities. It may mean more time for test taking. There are any number of accommodations that can be made, but those are made in collaboration with your child's clinicians and coordination with the school. It is your legal right. Do it. So I'm going to close with my last slide. Why study rare diseases? The actual notion that studying bone diseases will only have an impact on those so afflicted is a very short-sighted viewpoint. It also imposes undue bias on those who suffer from rare bone diseases, and that most are the result of genetic mutations. This is an imposition that cannot be attributed to anything but genetic makeup. There's nothing that you did wrong. This is what you have. Why else should we study rare bone diseases? Much of what we know, and Dr. Econ's alluded to this, about normal bone physiology has been the result of studying mutations that impact bones and cartilage. So here's a short list, a very short list of things that we've discovered as a consequence of mutations, human mutations, not mutations we make in a lab. This is Mother Nature's laboratory. And we've learned now about FGF23. We learned what that does. We've discovered it. Alkaline phosphatase, we now know what alkaline phosphatase does. RUNX2, which is now we know is the sort of the master regulator of bone formation. Sclerostin, which is another regulator of bone formation. Bone morphogenic protein involved in the differentiation of bone. Inorganic pyrophosphate, another molecule that becomes important in mineralization and inhibit mineralization. PTHRP, parathyroid hormone-related peptide, again, another, it's just an endocrine hormone, a hormone that acts locally. The FGF receptors mutations have been characterized as a consequence of human mutations. So, just to kind of give a quick impact, so sclerostin was discovered, the actual mutation, not that long ago, the actual mutation was found to be in the SAS gene. And when this gene is mutated, these folks have really heavy bones, very thick bones. And you can see on the scale, on the right-hand side is a patient with this disease on a scale, and you could put a bunch of skulls on the other one. You can see how heavy it is. So when these folks get into a pool, they sink. They can't swim. So as a consequence of this, an antibody has been developed. It's in phase 3 clinical trials. It is being marketed now as probably the most promising drug to date in the therapy of osteoporosis. Again, as a consequence of us learning about a rare bone disease. So now that benefits not just the rare bone disease population, but now the entire population. And that's how we have to advocate about XLH. Everything we learn about XLH, we're learning about normal physiology too, and potential therapeutics. My last slide, I just want to really speak to two really special people. Erica Parisi, the future doctors. Erica Parisi, she's an M1 at the Netter School of Medicine. And Ila Amente, she is a year 2. They have both committed themselves to do their thesis projects on XLH. Erica is doing the clinical studies that we're doing at Quinnipiac, and Eva is studying the impact of pregnancy and lactation on the maternal skeleton in XLH. And she just recently has some really interesting findings that show that the mineral content during pregnancy in the unaffected maternal skeleton too has a brand new type of mineral in it during pregnancy. And that's why we think during pregnancy, if my mom had 8 babies, her skeleton didn't fall apart. There seems to be this placeholder it's called hydroxyapatite that becomes incorporated into the skeleton that maintains the integrity of the skeleton during pregnancy and lactation, and then that's very quickly resorbed following pregnancy. So again, this is something we never really understood. Why can women have so many babies and breastfeed and not have osteoporosis? So again, a really important finding as a consequence of XLH. So I hope I impressed upon you today the importance of education and advocacy, and that we recognize and know and sympathize with the adult population, and that we're really doing everything we can to further our understanding of the disorder. These are just some acknowledgments these are people who have worked with me on the pregnancy and lactation studies. It's often a multi-collaborative process. And that's what science is. It's all of us working together. The XLH family, including Michael Econs and Eric, and our collaborators are Ultragenics. We really are a small family, and we hope to continue forward. Thank you very much. I have time for a quick question because I think we are a little bit behind. If I can figure out how to minimize this.
We have a microphone if anybody'd like to ask Carolyn a question. Meredith will run it down to you right quick. Raise your hand. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. When are you expecting that maybe that they might have this vaccine for the that you guys have been talking about?
The,
with
the antibody?
Yes.
So you're going to hear a lot about that in our next session. Very exciting. And, I just attended a national conference, the American Society for Bone and Mineral Research, and I heard a couple of talks that are now looking at brand new targets that are not FGF23 that have a significant impact on the osteomalacia. So we may be having new targets now, new novel therapeutic targets for the treatment of osteomalacia in the adult population, again, as a consequence of this person's research. It's really exciting.
I don't know that I need a microphone, but in cooperation with, you were talking to me last night about the 504. Is there any type of resource as far as dealing with the counselors in school in dealing with the impact? Sorry, I'm still post-baby hormonal. Dealing with
It's okay. Take your time.
the impact that this has on our children and how it affects them socially in dealing with their peers, and trying to be, normal.
Sure.
Is there any kind of, have any studies been done, anything in dealing with that?
Not much has been done on the social impact, and that's why we're making it a component of our studies. And I know that the ultragenic study is, they're really, really coming out there and being really setting the stage for the psychosocial impact that this disease has. My advice to you, I have a daughter with a rare disease, and it's been, I've been her advocate. That's what we do. You have to advocate for your child. You have to educate people from the school. Show up with your pamphlets. Show up with your flyers. Show up with your booklets. Provide website information and say, we need to sit down and we need to talk about my child. And get a note from your clinician. If you're working, if your insurance covers it, hiring, even temporarily, an occupational therapist is actually an awesome resource. I didn't know what an occupational therapist was until I started at the medical school, and we have a graduate school there. They are an amazing resource for advocating for patients, and they're highly trained and skilled. So as many resources as you can gather to advocate for your child and to educate the people that are in contact and work with in the schools, the better. Good place to start is the counseling department if the school has one. If not, break down the doors and just start talking to people. And you really, you got to be a pain in the ass is what you have to do. That's fine. So that's what moms do.
I would say in general for rare diseases, this is not just true of XLH, but it's pretty common if you have a rare disease for teachers or schools or doctors, or even to not believe that you have it, to say, oh, that's rare, people don't get that. And so having information can really be key, and that's why there are links to a few reasonably short articles on the XLH Network website done by various people, including some of us and other people.
And I'm hoping that we'll put some up on bullying curriculums because our children are teased. I know I experienced that. We're short people. We're different. We walk funny. We look different. And the recent curriculums that have been developed online with other rare disease groups are excellent. So we're looking at those right now to post those on our website for parents because it gives you strategic strategies of do this, do that, follow the steps, and parents can follow the steps.
Sure, and in fact, Erica and I were up quite late last night talking about this. She was so upset when we got back to the room last night about talking to a couple of people about the bullying that these children had encountered. And the more she talked, the more excited she got about pulling in some of her peers to better study and to better advocate for programs for kids like this. And so I think she's ready to rein in a couple of other medical students to really start talking about this and thinking about this, because it's just not appropriate. One more question?
In regards to pregnancy, is there any way that maybe as you're planning that, can you actually do testing to figure out if you're appropriate candidate for pregnancy from your doctor?
To determine whether you should. So there are genetic counseling. There are genetic counselors that you should work with in making that decision. It's a very, very personal decision, and nobody should be judged for making that decision. But, you know, my advice is just make an educated decision. Talk to a genetic counselor. Okay, so we have our final speaker now, and now you're going to hear a little bit more about this wonderful new therapy from Dr. Skriner. Is that right? Macica, Skriner, awesome. We're good. So anyways, without much